Ancient Corinth. Imagine Las Vegas, Wall Street, and the red light district of Amsterdam all rolled into one city. That's where our story of religious transformation begins, in a place where even saying someone was acting like a Corinthian was considered a serious insult.
You know what's fascinating about that context? Archaeological evidence shows Corinth had over 1,000 temple prostitutes working at the Temple of Aphrodite alone. The city's reputation for excess was legendary.
And into this den of commerce and vice walks Paul, probably exhausted and definitely alone. But here's what's surprising. His first move isn't to start preaching. Instead, he looks for a job.
That's such an interesting strategic choice. He ends up connecting with this couple, Aquila and Priscilla, who are fellow tent makers and recent refugees from Rome. The historical timing is remarkable.
Well, speaking of timing, these three are working together right when Emperor Claudius has expelled all Jews from Rome. Historical records from Suetonius actually mention this expulsion was connected to disputes about someone called Chrestus, likely a garbled reference to Christ.
Hmm. So you're saying this imperial decree accidentally created this powerful missionary team? That's quite the unintended consequence.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is how Paul adapts his approach to this challenging environment. He starts in the synagogue, but when faced with opposition, he literally moves his operation next door to a place owned by a man named Eustace.
You know what reminds me of modern startup culture? This idea of pivoting when your initial strategy isn't working. Paul's essentially doing a first century pivot.
And speaking of modern parallels, let's talk about Paul's bivocational approach. He's making tents during the week to support himself, which was actually pretty unusual for religious teachers at the time. Most rabbis wouldn't engage in manual labor while teaching.
That must have given him some serious credibility with the working class people of Corinth. No one could accuse him of being in it for the money.
Right. And then we get this fascinating glimpse into Paul's emotional state. He's clearly struggling with fear and doubt, so much so that he receives this divine reassurance in a vision. It's such a human moment for this legendary figure.
Well, that makes me wonder, what was he so afraid of? The text mentions that God promises no one will attack him to hurt him, which suggests there were some very real threats.
Then comes this crucial legal moment with the Roman proconsul Gallio. The local Jewish leaders try to shut Paul down through legal means, but Gallio's dismissal essentially creates legal protection for Christian preaching throughout the entire Roman Empire.
That's exactly like modern legal precedents, one judge's decision having far-reaching implications beyond the original case.
And then we have this brilliant preacher named Apollos showing up in Ephesus. Here's a guy who's incredibly eloquent, knows the Hebrew scriptures inside and out, but only has partial knowledge about Jesus.
The way Aquila and Priscilla handle that situation is like a masterclass in mentorship, taking him aside privately instead of publicly correcting him.
You know what's particularly striking about this whole narrative? It shows how movements spread through these informal networks. Tent makers, merchants, travelers, they're essentially using the Roman Empire's own infrastructure to spread their message.
So in a way, it's like they're creating this alternative community within the existing power structures, not trying to overthrow them, but working within them to create change.
And that's really the bigger story here. How this small group of people, working through personal relationships and everyday connections, managed to establish a thriving community in one of the most challenging environments imaginable.
Looking back, it's remarkable how many of these principles still apply today. The importance of adaptability, the power of personal relationships, the impact of legal precedents, and the effectiveness of working within existing systems while maintaining your core values.
Well, that's what makes this story so relevant. It's not just ancient history, it's a case study in how movements grow and transform societies, even against seemingly impossible odds.